Hello! Hello, people from the internet. It's Saturday once again. So, I will continue in my quest. Hey, Fair, what's up? Yeah, oh, hello, everyone. Yeah. We shall continue on our quest to provide not cute anime girl noises, but hard and rigorous logical definitions. I have some good news for the channel. I have found a source of public domain music that fits the mood, the vibes of the channel. I will start using it once I have like a decent list. But for now, let me put the coag musics, so we all get settled in. As Rupert in our chat kindly mentioned, yes, this is what he entered as homework. So I really appreciate the effort that Rupert is doing in turning homework, because it allows me to talk about why homeworks in higher education are so important, and why homeworks are just miserable, and the way most standard teachers use them, especially during elementary and middle school, is so completely awful and kills any educational drive. So, like many people, I was raised and educated in a model in which homework was framed as work I needed to do. Somewhat, I mean, not exactly, but as if it were some sort of penance or a punishment I needed to bear. Like, it's something bad and I had to do it because that's just part of the hierarchical structure of schools. So I hated the idea of homework. I, as an undiagnosed autistic, found it insulting that I had to do homework because it came across as punishment, as something meant to humiliate me and make me submit. And when people told me, but you need to do homework in order to understand what's going on, again, as an undiagnosed autistic child, but I told them, but I do know! I get the best grades on the exam out of everyone in the class, so I obviously do know. I do not need to do the homework. It's just unnecessary punishment, because if the purpose is to learn the lesson, then I learn the lesson. Look, here's the results. You're just forcing me to do rote work for no reason, or as a way to make me submit. So now you made it personal. Now you made it an ego fight where if I do the homework, myself is devalued and wounded. So now I have a personal ideological incentive to defy you and not do the homework, because now we're in a pissing fight. We're in an ego peace fight. So yeah, I absolutely hated that. Rupert in the chat saying it's so fucking hard to unlearn this, God, and a bunch of crying emotes. I think that means that Rupert completely understands where I'm coming from. But actually, another streamer asked me, so how does it feel to pass from doing homework as a student to designing homeworks as a teacher. And the answer I gave was, well, it's a lot like being a dungeon master after being a player character for so long. Now that I get to step inside the other role, I go, oh, I get it. I now understand how homeworks can be a tool for good. They are not supposed to just be rote work or just mindless drudgery. They are not meant to instigate an antagonic hierarchy between teachers and students. They are just a tool. And the cool thing about properly designed homeworks that respects the students' times is that students cannot tell you. So this is like a bit worrisome, or a bit of a difficult situation. Students, by necessity, cannot tell you, very important what I am about to say, with complete certainty that they are understanding the course. In my previous anecdote, when I was talking about me as an autistic child, I wasn't just saying, yeah, I understand. I said, yes, I understand. Look at the exams. The exams prove that I do understand. So, how I started using homeworks is not as a way to grade students, because that just gives undue anxiety. And that's also why so some context, I do give classes online. And I have to spend some time with most of my students at first, explaining them that I will assign homework and that I expect them to make mistakes. The homework is not given with the supposition that they have to do it perfectly. I do not grade homeworks. That is completely counterintuitive. Or if I do grade homeworks, I grade the homework for the sake of the homework. I do not count the homework grades as part of the final grading of the course. I do not fail or pass people anyways, because I mean, I'm not part of an institution. That's not kind of the point. So these homeworks are not meant to be done with the pressure of getting everything right. I expect people to make mistakes. And those mistakes are what allow me to see what lessons are being understood and which ones aren't. But in order for that to happen, I need the student to come from a position of confidence and trust. Because we live in a society gang with gamers. And this society has drilled into us the fear of being wrong or being exhibited as wrong or mistaken. So it takes a while to break away with that fear. And that is another reason why I really value what Rupert is doing here and trusting me with their homework. Even more so that we are going to stream that homework. And Rupert very bravely shared this with me, and we're going to go over some of the errors they made. I'm sorry, there are some mistakes, but it's fine. The point is that I want to create a space in which making errors is fine. We do not humiliate people. We do not insult people. We are in the process of learning, and making mistakes is an inescapable part of learning. If you want to learn to do something, you will fuck it up. You will make mistakes. And if we enter new hobbies or new projects with this latent, unconscious, trauma-based, socially installed fear that every mistake is a valid excuse for other people to make fun of us and hurt us, that will stop us from learning and trying new things. which is an attitude that I find completely aberrant and opposed to learning. Yeah, don't worry, Rupert. We're all here to support each other, to expand knowledge, to find avenues of education outside institutions. Institutions that, oh God, I'm sorry, but I have to do it. Institutions such as my dear university, alma mater, UNAM, that spend anywhere from 100 million to 150 million pesos in supposedly online entry exam with supposedly AI-powered anti-cheating software, and it was a complete clusterfuck. Most of the people who submitted exams cheated. The curve was completely anomalous. It was an utter mess. So, because institutions can make those kind of mistakes, and those mistakes are embarrassing because they are supposed to be professional, and they're not just professional, they are a state-sponsored institution in which the state has granted incredible amount of trust and money. They should know better. So, here in this channel, we ruthlessly criticize institutions and we support individuals. Institutions don't have feelings that get hurt. Individuals do. It's all for the sake of increasing our capacities to act, to learn, to draw, to sing, whatever. But in this case, we're here to reason mathematically and make models. And we will never be out of models because they are infinite! Okay, so let's see. First, some pointers. Also, by the way, this homework is exclusive content for the members of my Discord. If you want to do the homework, I suggest you join. It's not just a hook to get people to join the Discord. We're just starting, but hopefully it can be a good place for coordinating education and learning. It's not just that I want to hook people, it's that it's easier for me to upload documents there and to track them, because, I mean, I can just release this document and that's fine. But what really makes it work is that people turn it in. Again, like Rupert did. Thank you, Rupert, once again. So that we can get a sense of what is being learned and what is not. So, yeah, homework on the Discord. Join the Discord if you want to do the homework. And chat with other nerds and share cool stuff. Okay, so we're going to use this notation, which is standard notation for a lot of mathematical texts. Mathematicians tend to use curly braces to represent sets. To represent sets. Here the verb representation is doing a lot of work. We are not depicting sets. We are not saying that sets have like a boundary. Whenever we draw sets, whether as circles or as lists or as any other method, those are just representations. A set is either an abstract entity or an abstract process. Whether you want to call them entities or process depends on your ontology, which is if you want to believe that sets have like some sort of independent existence outside the human mind. Personally, I don't. So I like to think that sets are all abstract processes going into some human mind at any given point. So for now, we're not going to define sets. We are about to do something really weird, where we're going to presuppose set theory to define first order logic, and then we'll define set theory in the syntax of first order logic. Yeah, and mathematicians can do that whole thing where they kind of presuppose the thing they want to build. It's fine, it works, it's a circular justification, but because mathematics is not temporal, it can work. I mean, it really depends on how foundational you want your foundations of mathematics to be. Because we're not actually founding mathematics, we're not justifying and grounding mathematics into a pure substratum. We're just trying to teach people how to think mathematically. And mathematicians do this kind of shit all the time, so all the more reason to do it like that. So for now, we're gonna take sets as an intuitive, naive thing. We're not gonna formally define a set. Sets are just gonna be abstract mathematical objects that are defined entirely by the elements they hold. So what is a set? A set is something that has elements, and that's it. That is all a set needs to be. For now. Later we'll prove that this naive definition of a set leads to contradictions, and that's bad. But for now, just take it. Just buy it from me for now. So for example, a set A is an arbitrary name, that is composed of the elements 1 and 2, will be represented as A. 2 dots. We use our curly braces, and then inside the curly braces are 1, 2. The comma is just there as a visual aid to clearly delineate that this is one element and this is the other. Since a set is defined entirely on its elements, the order doesn't matter. So 2, 1 is the same abstract mathematical object as 1, 2. Repeats are also redundant. So 1, 1, 1, 2 is just 1, 2 because adding more instances of the element 1 does not change the construction of the set. The set is still just the set that contains 1, 2. And here 1, 2 are not numbers, they are just symbols. In order for something to function like a proper number, we'll see that the order in which they are arranged is more important than what we call them. Or how we draw them. Mathematicians use the parentheses for ordered n-tuplets. Tuplets being 2, triplets being 3, quadruplets being 4, and so on and so on. But because we use parentheses in our formulas, we'll use the angle brackets, which are these symbols, to represent ordered sequences, or n-tuplets. So 1, 2 with angle brackets represents the ordered tuple 1 to 2. It's not universal to say 1 to 2, but I found that auditorily it serves to distinguish between 1, 2, like this, and 1, 2, 2. But it can also be confusing. So there's no perfect solution, and mathematicians aren't exactly the best visual designers. So there's some drag between what will be ideal to depict and what is used. So 1 to 2 to 1 will be the triplet of 1 to 2 to 1. Unlike sets, here the order does matter. Obviously they're ordered sets. Or actually no, they're ordered n-tuplets, not sets. Spoilers. Eventually we can describe them as sets, but for now we're going to distinguish between n-tuplets and a set. So 1 to 2 is not the same as 2 to 1. And here I tend to use a very gross joke. It's not the same to kiss a bot than to have a bot kiss you. The order does matter. Also, here repeats do matter. 1 to 1 is not just 1. This will not be an ordered n-tuple. This will just be a set. Ordered tuplets will belong in sets too, as elements, so they will be inside curly brackets. So our toy models, our intuitively basic, naive notion of a model, we're gonna describe them like this. The order I forgot just now. Use the mnemonic, grouper. It is not the same to kiss a butt than to have a butt kiss you. So in this toy model, the domain only has 3 elements. Element A, B, and C. Elements A and B are in the P property. And the order pairs A and B and A to B and C to A are elements in the relation R. So the first formula is A of P. Here Rupert says satisfied. A is contained within P in the model, so fills up the slot. It's neither true or false. Not quite. No. Butts kissed is the passive voice. That is someone kissing a butt. That retains the order. Kissing a butt means you putting your lips on a butt. A butt kissing you, well, imagine that. That will be a different order. I know it's gross, but let me explain why I tend to use gross or weird or outlandish examples. That's because memory is tied to strangeness and novelty. Things that are novel are easier to remember. Things that stand out tend to be more novel. So, strange or gross or examples that trigger an emotional reaction are easier to remember. So the thing is, we mentioned last week that variables, particularly free variables, formulas or terms, sorry, this is not a formula, this is a term. Terms that have free variables, that is a variable that is not under the scope of any quantifier, those terms cannot be made true or false normally. We'll see. So a term that has no quantifier in its scope, like this, like x of p, this term cannot, before being true or false, we need to check if it can be satisfied or not satisfied. We will provide a rigorous definition of satisfaction today. But intuitively for now, P of A does not have, it's fine, Rupert, it's fine. See, that's why the homework is good. Because now we know that you misunderstood that explanation. So now that makes it easier for you to understand it this time around. And that makes it easier for me as a teacher to be more mindful of that explanation next time around. So that is the reason why homeworks can be good, because homeworks are a type of dialogue between teacher and student that help both if done with honesty and respect. So P of A, because it is not a free variable, it's a term that is saturated with a constant, can be true or false. The reason why it is true is because, A is contained within P in the model. That's it. So it is true. There exists something such that it is P. True. P contains some elements of the domain. It's true. Yeah. That is a perfectly valid explanation of this. At least something is P. A is P. B is P. So that's fine. For everything, it is not P. Here, Rupert made the following confusion. he read this formula as if it were this formula. Here it's saying everything is not P exactly. But the explanation Rupert provides is statement indicates all elements of the domain are not included in P, which is true due to C. But that explanation fits when the negation is not applied to P, but to not everything. In fact, this formula is saying something contrary. Here it says not everything is P. Here it's saying everything is not P. So in order for this formula to be true, we will need for P to not have any elements of the domain. And so this formula is actually false. There exists something and there exists something, possibly another thing, such that the first thing is in the relation with the other thing. True, our set contains something that fulfills this is quantifier in both cases. Well, we don't need an element, we need an ordered set. Sorry, an ordered tuple. Because R does not have singular elements, it has ordered pairs. So we cannot pick A from the first and A from the second. But it's fine because either element of this set, the R set that contains ordered pairs, fulfills 4. There exists something such as P, and there exists something such as not P. Here Rupert nails it. True, it is both true that some of the domain is contained in P and that some elements are not in P, specifically C. Perfect. Great work. Nailed it. There exists something such that R of X with itself. Here Rupert is correct. It is false. But I do not understand his explanation. So see, another reason why homeworks are useful in this manner is because the homeworks I was given as a kid, they could be graded in a very mechanical way, like multiple choice. And I understand the institutional need for multiple choice questions or exercises, but I find that the exercises or the homeworks in which people need to explain their reasoning are infinitely more fruitful than just A, B, C, or D, or just true or false, or just correct or incorrect. Asking people to explain what they were thinking, or just asking the student, okay, why? Why is this so? Exercises one of the most important, incredibly important capacities right now in the cyberpunk year of our Lord 2026, and that is metacognition. It trains the student to be able to express what they were thinking. And in order to be able to express what you were thinking, you need to be able to observe your own thinking. Something which you absolutely cannot do when you use a large language model powered program. Because you cannot provide a meaningful narration of the process of the construction of the answer. So, if you're a teacher and if you are watching this, try to design your exercises such that the student needs to relate what was their process in constructing the answer. That kind of self-observant narration is something that LLMs may be able to falsify, but they will provide something deeply incoherent. Okay, for every x, p of x, then r of x to b. Rupert says, true. B is an element of both P and R. But the problem is that we're not asking for just P. We're asking for everyone. And this formula is actually false under this model because there is at least one counterexample. And actually it is B. Because B is in P, but we do not have B in relationship with B. Now these are more interesting. There exists an x such that either not P of x or that x is in relationship with A. True, there is such an element that is not in P and is in a doublet with A, aka C. Perfect. Hello, Gory Greg Jep. And yeah, Rupert, absolutely correct. You also nail it with this one. In 9, Rupert says false. States that all elements are either P or not P. Since R has C outside of P's jurisdiction, this is false? Well, not quite, because C makes this part true. Nice use of our newest emote, which is a very pixelated, almost NES-like portrait of Raymond Smullyan. And here Rupert just says false. So, I mean, not really. Let me show you like the answers. Or a more exhaustive and formal approach. Again, this is not meant to say, you should have done this. It's not just, I want to provide the answers, the correct answers, so people know, okay, what is going on. And to serve as an example of, okay, what are we actually trying to do or accomplish? So, let's take the first exercise as well. So we have our model, P of A. P of A is true because A is in the set of P. That's it. Yeah, don't worry. It takes a while for all of this to get settled in your brain. So, there exists something such that P of X is true because there is at least one element in P. Or, more technically, it is true. It's tricky. It's always tricky. There is no automatic method for formalizing language. If it were, then we'd be in trouble. If there were a method for formalizing natural language flawlessly and without loss, then I would believe in so-called AI, as it currently exists. But there isn't. I can talk more about that if we ever get to information theory. Or, more technically, it is true because P of X, that is the term with a free variable without the scope of any quantifier, can be satisfied by one arbitrary assignment under the model. Now, I know this doesn't make a lot of sense right now, but the idea is this. X is a variable, correct? Is a space in which something can be substituted. And that something that can substitute the X, think of X like a joker or a wildcard, that something that substitutes the X has to be an element of our domain. So, P of X can be satisfied if there is at least one arbitrary assignment under the model. For now, we can think of assignments as just someone arbitrarily choosing. that is not the case. We will provide a formal definition of assignment later on today, but for now, just imagine that if I can arbitrarily choose an object of the domain to make this formula true, P of something, then P of X can be satisfied. I cannot say for certain it is true because I do not know who is the real identity of X. I do not have enough information to say, oh, X has to be this constant. If any of you all are getting algebra flashbacks, good. If someone had explained this to me about variables when I was trying to understand algebra in middle school, I would have been a much happier student. So, yeah, nice. The neurons are connected. So, I do not know for sure who the X in this formula really is. But I can say, well, I mean, there is at least one case in which if instead of X, I think it is A, then it will be true. I already know that because I know that P of A is true. So, I cannot say that P of X is true, but I can say, well, there's at least one case in which it can be satisfied under one arbitrary assignment of X. So an arbitrary assignment is just saying, okay, I'll just pretend that the X, the real identity of X, is A, or B, or C, or any arbitrary element of the domain. So if P of X can be satisfied, that means that this formula, where the X is under the scope of an existential quantifier, is true. So, an existential quantifier is true whenever the formula it covers under its scope can be satisfied. Okay? For all X, not P of X. Let's walk about it. Let's walk it through. For this formula is false because in order for not P of X to be true for all, which is what this formula is telling me, a formula under the scope of a universal quantifier needs to be true for every element of the domain. So, in order for not P of X to be true, P of X needs to be false. But I cannot say P of X can be false. So, I will define my negation in this term. The negation is true only when P of X is not satisfied. Well, actually, this formula, because it has a free variable, it can neither be true or false. But I want it to be true for all cases. So in order to be true for all cases, it needs to be satisfied for all cases. In order for the negation to be satisfied, the formula without the negation needs to not be satisfied for all assignments under the model. However, there is at least one assignment that satisfies Px. We know that from the previous two exercises. So there is at least one assignment that does not satisfy not Px. P of A, for example. P of A satisfies P of X, and therefore it does not satisfy not P of X. Or, in human language, this formula is telling me that everything is not P. But hey, there are at least two things that are P. Uh-oh. So if we want to treat this as human beings that have not been poisoned by logic Spanish or logic English, we will say that this formula means nothing is P. Thanks for the hydrate. But again, intuitively, if the formula is saying nothing is P, well, but at least two things are P. Therefore, it is false that nothing is P. There exists an X, there exists a Y, such that X is in the R relationship to Y. This formula is true because there is at least one assignment that satisfies Rx to Y. That is, there is at least one ordered pair in the R relation. If we all have understood so far what does it mean to satisfy a formula, if we understand what it means to satisfy a single variable, then we know what it is to satisfy an ordered pair or an ordered triplet. It just means there is something in the relation. That's it. There exists something that is P, and there exists something that is not P. This, much like Rupert stated, is true by the same reasoning. In order for this formula to be true, the conjunction needs to be true, because the conjunction is the main formula here. So both formulas need to be true. We already know that this formula is true as per exercise 2. There exists a Y such that Y is not P is true when there is at least one assignment that does not satisfy Py. There is such an assignment, C. C does not satisfy P because C is outside, it's not an element of P. So this formula is true, and because both formulas are true, the conjunction is true. So in human language, this formula is saying something is P and something is not P. Okay, 6. 6 was a trap. While similar to 4, 4 is R of x with y. Here we're saying there exists an x such that x is in R to itself. While similar to 4, in this case, the x variable is repeated. That means that the substitution of the variables for an arbitrary constant has to be simultaneous. This is very important. This is very important. This is very important. Keep it in mind. We cannot replace the same variable for two different elements. Unless we're playing some really sicko mode balatro, a joker can only be replaced by one value. We cannot say that a joker simultaneously has two or more values. That is just an example to get people used to this idea. The arbitrary assignment of a variable applies to every instance of the same variable. X can only be replaced by one element. We cannot replace X in one space by A and then in the next space by B. That is adding extra information. This formula is strictly telling us there exists something that is in the R relationship with itself, not with something else. Can we find an arbitrary assignment in the model such that in R we have an ordered pair with the same constant repeated? For example, can we find A to A or C to C? No, there is no such pair. No arbitrary assignment can satisfy R of x to x in this model, so there exists something that is in the R relationship with itself is false under this model. We check again our model. A to B and C to A. There is not a single ordered pair that is A to A, B to B, or C to C. And those are the three only possible candidates. None of them are in the R relation, so the formula cannot be satisfied. Therefore, it is false under this model. The formula for every x that is P is in the relationship R with B. It's fine, Rupert. That's what we're trying to advance on. So every element that is in P is in the R relationship with B. That is what the formula is saying. So because it is covered by the scope of a universal quantifier, it needs to be true for all arbitrary assignments of x. But the formula applies to a conditional. So we have three elements in our toy model, so we can do an exhaustive case-by-case study this time. Case number 1. Is the formula true for A, substituting the x for A? Is PA true? Yes, that's the first exercise. And so the consequent needs to be true. Is R of A to B true? Yes, because the ordered pair A to B is an element of R. Case number 2. We substitute x with B. Is B in P? Yes, B is an element of P. So R of B to B needs to be true for the conditional to be true. Is R of B to B true? No. We saw in the previous exercise that there is no ordered pair A of A, B to B, or C to C. So, because the ordered pair B to B is not an element of R, that makes the consequent false and the antecedent true. That is the falsehood condition for the conditional. So there is at least one arbitrary assignment that does not satisfy P of x, then R of x to B. And so this formula, every x that is P is in the R relationship with B, is false. Just for the sake of completion, let's go to our final case. The final case will be replacing x with a C. Is P of C true? No. C is not an element of P. So the conditional is somewhat trivially true because the antecedent fails. And that's it. In order for there exists something that is not P or something that is in the R relationship with A to be true, we need at least one assignment to satisfy this disjunction. So we just need one assignment of the variable x to satisfy either not P of x or x of R to A. Doesn't need to be the same one. As long as an assignment makes either side true, we're golden. But in our model, it just so happens that C satisfies both. P of C is false, and so not P of C is true. RC to A is true because C to A is in R, and so the formula is true. For every x, P of x or not P of x needs to be true for all assignments of x. Notice, however, the formula P or not P. There is no way to not satisfy this formula, not just for this model, but for any model. If any element satisfies P of x, then the formula is true. If any element does not satisfy P of x, then they satisfy not P of x. All models of first order logic have at least one element. And for any element of any model, it is either in P or not in P. This formula, therefore, is not just true under model 1. It is true under any model. And that will be our definition of logical truth or validity for first order logic. True under any model. This formula is a disjunction, so if either side is true, the formula is true. From exercise 2, we know that there exists an x such that p of x is true, and so the formula is true. But if we look closely, there does not exist an x such that p of x, however, is a negation of the formula. So it cannot be true at the same time. It has to be false in this model. But consider that for any model, much like in the previous exercise, all of the models of first order logic, FOL is our shortened term for first order logic, have at least one model, and either there is an element in P, in which case P of x is satisfied, and there exists an x such as P of x is true, or there are no elements in P. P will be an empty set. Any set that does not have elements inside of it is called the empty or null set. And so no assignment will satisfy Px, and so there exists an x such as P of x will be false, and the negation of the formula will be true. Thus, this is another example of a logically true formula. Basically, this formula is saying either something is P or nothing is. At least something. I mean, yeah, it's a tautology. It's saying nothing. Now we do the same exercise but with a different model. We're going to do it faster this time. P of A is true because A is in the set of P. It is exactly the same as in the previous model. At this point, I think we can intuit that if any formula is true with a constant, then that guarantees that there exists at least something that satisfies the formula. So if A is P, then obviously, intuitively, I know that at least something is P. If I am a nerd, then you all already know that there exists something that is a nerd. We're actually losing information in this exchange. For every x, not P of x is false, because in order for not P of x to be true of all, P will need to be empty. I don't know why, I think I skipped this. And Px will need to not be satisfied. So this is just like our previous exercise. There exists an x and there exists a y such that r of x to the y is true. It's the same as in the last time. So is there at least one ordered pair in R? Yes. Bam. Got it. So in order for this formula to be true, both sides need to be true. The conjunction needs to be true, blah, blah. There exists an x such as P of x is true, as per exercise 2. But there exists a y such that not P of y is not true this time around, because there is no assignment of Py that does not satisfy Py. Every assignment satisfies Py, because all of the elements of the domain are in P. If you notice, the set of the domain and the set of P are the same thing. There is no element of the domain that belongs to the complement of P. If any of you all know about Venn diagrams, the complement is the set of things that belong in the domain but do not belong in another set. So there is no element in the complement of P. Everything is P. Nothing is not P. And so there exists a y such that not p of y is false, and because both conjuncts are not true, the formula is false. It's conjuncts. So this time around, we couldn't replace the variable for two different elements in the previous model. But in this model, all constants are in the reflexive relation. What does a reflexive relation mean? A reflexive relation is one in which all of the elements are in the relationship with themselves. That is the definition of a reflexive relationship. So we just need A of A to be in R, or B of B to B, or C to C, but we have all of them. We can pick whichever we want. And because there is at least one reflexive pair in R, this formula is true. So for every x such as P of x, was thinking about the John hates people who don't hate this exercise. Yeah, got it. Yeah, exactly. Hating yourself is a reflexive relationship. So the formula, everything that is P is in the relationship R with B. We'll just go straight for the counterexample. We will not go case by case. In this model, P of A is true. We know that from the first exercise. But A to B is false in R. Since this one. Sorry for the typos. Did not have time to proofread this. A to B is not in R. Check that. Nope. A to B is not in R, so therefore the formula is false. Hello, Bones. Thanks for the visit. There exists an x such that either not P of x or x is in the R relationship with A. We saw earlier that not P of x cannot be satisfied because all elements of the model are in P. However, we just need one x that is in the R relationship with A. And in fact, all elements of the model are in such a situation. So, because we just need one side to be true, yeah, we can replace this x with A, B, or C, and it will make this side true, and it will make the whole formula true. And well, the last two exercises are trivial because we prove that everything is either P or not P. It's obviously true because we saw that the formula is true for all models, and for all models literally means all models, every model. And do 10, same as above. Okay, now these exercises are somewhat trickier. Please stop me if you need me to explain something. We need to prove that these formulas are contingent. Contingent means that there is at least one assignment that satisfies them and one assignment that does not satisfy them. Now, because all of these are formulas and not terms with free variables, I can default to true or false. But we'll have cases in which, really fringe limit cases, in which contingency is defined over satisfiability and not truth or falsehood. So, I need to make this formula true and false with two different models. In this model, it is true. Everything that is P is not F. Okay? A and B are P. But neither of them are F. True. How do I make it false? Well, I just make everything P and F at the same time. So, in this model, is A P? Yes. Is A and not F? No. Actually, A belongs to F. So, It will be true, false, false, false. There exists something that is in the R relationship to everyone. Imagine that the R relationship is love. There exists someone that loves everyone. Aww. Let's make a model in which this is true. Okay? Imagine there's three individuals, A, B, and C. And I will define the R relationship in such a way such that A loves everyone. And everyone literally means everyone. So A loves himself or themselves, A loves B, and A loves C. A loves everyone. Yay! And that makes this formula true under this model. Now, what do I need to do to make this formula false? Simple. Make sure that there is not an element that loves everyone. In here, A loves B, B loves no one, C loves no one, and no one loves themselves. So there is not a single element that loves everyone, and therefore the formula is false. In this, we have to satisfy. Okay, I'll break it down because it's a little bit tricky. So I need to make this formula true. In order to make this formula true, there needs to be one arbitrary assignment that satisfies this. But in order to satisfy a universal quantifier, this formula needs to be satisfied by all assignments of y. That means that we need to find at least one x such that for all others q's are true. If A is q, then A is q is obviously true. It's another universally valid formula. Q of A, if and only if Q of B is true under the true model, and so is Q of A if and only if Q of C. In the model that makes this formula false, no element can satisfy this. A doesn't satisfy it under this formula. B does not satisfy under the symmetrical case, because if you do not satisfy this formula, then obviously you cannot satisfy the inverse, which have the same conditions. Because in the model that makes this false, Q of A is true and Q of B is false. So true if and only if false, false. This case is symmetrical, so we already proved it. And the final case that remains is Q of C if and only if Q of A. Well, this is false, this is true. So there is no element that under all assignments of y can satisfy this formula, and therefore the formula is false. So basically, if any element is in Q, then all the elements need to be in Q. So this formula is saying, in human language, either all are in Q or no one is in Q. This formula is also true when there are no elements in Q. This points to an interesting aspect of our first order logic, because we can have empty sets, which are what allow us to say no one, nothing. In order for this formula to be true, it is false or we negate that there exists a y such that P of y. Nothing needs to be in P. And so we have this funny thing. A set of opening and closing curly braces with nothing inside. That, my friends, is the empty set. And that's a very special thing. Keep it in mind. So in order to be true, I need to make this formula true. So I need to make sure that nothing is in P. The negation of there exists a y such as p of y necessitates that nothing is an element of p. If nothing is an element of p, then every x that is p is then f, follows necessarily. Yeah, well, the thing is, the empty set is not a villain. The empty set is your friend. We're gonna use the empty set so much. So it's more like the character that you think is a villain, but it's actually one of your best buddies, and is fighting the real evil the whole time. So if nothing is p, if nothing is p, Magus, aka the Piccolo of Chrono Trigger. If nothing is p, this formula will always be true, because in order for this formula to be false, I will need to show you something that is p, but is not f. And because I cannot show you something that makes p of x true and x of f false, that makes this formula true. When we have such cases where something is true because the conditional is always empty, we call this truth by vacuity. And many mathematicians have problems with that. To keep illustrating this, I can say the following. Every pink dinosaur alive right now is a communist. That is a true statement. If any of you want to tell me, well, no, that's bullshit, that's not true. All I have to do is say, okay, show me a living pink dinosaur that is not a communist. Because you cannot provide me with a counterexample, I am correct in a very unsatisfying way. Now, I need to check if there's actually any living pink dinosaurs. No. There are living dinosaurs. There were pink dinosaurs, but there are no living pink dinosaurs. This also allows me to say basically nonsense. One of my favorite examples is all Garflexos are CBD Bopitis. Sassy Undertale's alive and well, actually. Well, Sassy Undertale is not living and concrete and real in the model Earth. But yeah, if we can keep this going further. I mean, we could just say all Garflexos are CBD Bopitis. I don't even have to define what a Garflexor or a CBD Bopity is. I can say, well, I mean, there are no Garflexos, so whatever. Truth by vacuity, it's a trip. Okay. In order for this formula to be true, there exists an x and there exists a y such that p of x and f of y needs to be false. In order for this formula to be false, no assignment can satisfy this. So nothing can be an element of p, and we also need to not satisfy any y such that f of y. In order to not satisfy f of y, nothing needs to be an element of f. So the original formula you're saying nothing is either p or f. And that can only be true when both p and f are empty. If there is anything in either p or f, then this formula is false. Okay. We good? These are just an approximation of what makes a formula of first order logic true. The thing is, we need to be more rigorous in our definitions. And for that, we're gonna go back to Mendelssohn, and particularly this is Mendelssohn paraphrasing Alfred Tarski, which is another huge nerd that made modern life possible, and almost nobody knows who he was. Yeah, that's great. So right now we're going to define in a more rigorous way what it means to have a model for first order logic. This semantic theory was pretty much made by Alfred Tarski in 1936. So let me read. The concepts of satisfiability and truth are intuitively clear, but following, I will not consider it intuitively clear for most people, but mathematicians are not most people. Following Tarski, we can also provide a rigorous definition. Such a definition is necessary for carrying out precise proofs of many meta-mathematical results. Say that 3 times quickly. Satisfiability will be the fundamental notion, on the basis of which the notion of truth will be defined. Moreover, instead of talking about the n tuples of objects that satisfy a well-formed formula that has n free variables, it is much more convenient from a technical standpoint to deal uniformly with the numerable sequences. Why? Because models need to be infinite. That is the entire point, and that is why we cannot have truth tables of first order logic formulas. When I say that the models need to be infinite, strictly speaking, I am saying that the models of first order logic, the size of the domain is at least the size of the natural numbers. So I need it to be, at the very least, as big as the first infinite. Yes, spoilers, there are multiple infinites. There is, in fact, a hierarchy, an infinite hierarchy of infinite sizes. And there are infinites of larger size, strictly speaking, larger cardinality than others. But I at least need, to make first order logic work, I need the domain to be infinite, the numerable. The numerable is a technical mathematical term that means infinite but countable. That is, are there more infinities than SS transformations? By SS, do you mean super science? And the answer is yes. There is a large infinite amount of infinites. Thanks for becoming as amigo. Hey, Lulz. So, yeah, first order logic needs the domain to be at least as infinite as the natural numbers. That's what the numerable means. And with the numerably sized domain, I can have a, very large number of denumerable sequences. What is a denumerable sequence? So imagine that my domain is literally the natural numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, da, 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 da. And it goes on and on forever because it's infinite. Now, that is just one sequence, one possible sequence, one possible way of ordering my denumerable set. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, blah, 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 then the normal order. But try to imagine this. How many possible ways of ordering or sequencing the natural numbers can we make? We can make a sequence that goes 100, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, blah, 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 99. And then 200, 101, 102, 103, pa, 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 and then 300, pa, 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 400, pa, 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 pa. That is another denumerable sequence. So, instead of thinking of assignments of variables as an arbitrary exercise that someone has to choose, I have a very large amount of denumerable sequences that I can use as basically a random sequence generator for all possible sequences of the model. What we have in mind is that a denumerable sequence, S1, S2, S3, and so on, is to be thought of as satisfying a well-formed formula B that has 1, 2, or n free variables. N is an arbitrarily large number. If the n-tuple, so the ordered sequence that goes from 1 to n, where n is an arbitrarily large but finite number, satisfies B in the usual sense, which we just saw in the homework. So instead of me choosing whether I'm going to replace x with A or B or C arbitrarily, me a human choosing, I will have a machinery that will cover all possible substitutions for me. I will just have a set, the set of all possible denumerable sequences, the set of all possible permutations of the domain from which I can just pick and choose any given sequence and see if that satisfies or does not satisfy. The order of the substitution will match the order of the appearances of the variables. The first variable will be substituted by the first element of the sequence. The second variable that appears will be substituted by the second element of the sequence, and so on, and so on, and so on. For any n number of variables. For example, a denumerable sequence S1, S2, S3 of objects in the domain of an interpretation M, M stands for model, will turn out to satisfy the well-formed formula A of 2 slots first relation, x2 and x5, if and only if the ordered pair S2 and S5 is in the relation assigned by the predicate letter by the interpretation M. This is basically machine code for what we just did. Let me illustrate. If and only if the ordered pair, in which case it's just 2 and 5, we'll just name them 2 and 5, we don't need more, is in the relation, basically is in the set assigned by the predicate letter by the interpretation M. So what did we just do? We made a model and we just checked, hey, is the ordered pair 2 to 5 in the predicate letter set in the model? Yes or no? If it is, it satisfies. If it isn't, it does not satisfy. The only difference, the only thing that we're doing is that before I gave you a specific model, a toy model with only 3 elements, this definition allows me to talk about any possible model of an infinite size. It's fine, Rupert, don't worry. To be honest, most people who just want to dabble in logic don't need to learn this, but I do it for completion's sake, and because when you're infected with mathematician brain, you don't like just saying things. You have a compulsion to say, okay, this, and I can prove it. This, and I can show you it's true because of this. So that is why a lot of workbooks in mathematics cannot be read cover to cover, which we have seen previously in this book. Because sometimes the mathematician will write, oh, what I am about to show you is true because of this. And then they introduce a 10-page proof that requires more knowledge than the subject that is being about to be taught. So, not fun times. So, I have this difficult choice as an internet teacher, so to speak, where, I mean, if you're really interested in math, this is good. If you're not as interested, it's not as useful. It's kind of just like a rigorous programming of how our system works, just to show that, yes, it indeed does work. And this will allow me, if I were so inclined, to do formal proofs about the system, which we're not going to do in this course. That, I think, is beyond the scope of a beginner course. So, let M be an interpretation of the language L, and let D be the domain of M. So, M is just an interpretation, which is just a specific assignment. And D is any domain, which we will now take to be of infinite size. Let sigma be the set of all the numerable sequences of D. So D has the elements, and sigma has an infinite amount of sequences of all possible orderings of the elements of the domain. For a well-formed formula B of the language L, we shall define what it means for a sequence, as the sequence shall be called S, and S is an ordered n-tuple of infinite size that goes from S1, S2, S3, and so on to infinity and beyond, in sigma to satisfy B in M, the model. As a preliminary step, for a given S in sigma, we shall define a function that assigns to each term T of L an element in D. This is just a way of saying the formula, the function S applied to a particular term T. So this is just a function. And this is replaced with an element of the domain D. If T is a variable and it appears in the J spot, the formula assigns that variable the element of the sequence that is in the J number. So if X is the first variable, it assigns the formula the first. No, not the formula. If X is the first variable that appears in the formula, there we go, the function S assigns X the element that is in the first spot. We replace J with 1. X1 gets the first slot. X2 gets the second slot. X3 gets the third slot, and so on and so on. It's actually quite simple once you actually decode it from math to human. If T is an individual constant, A, then the function is interpretation of the constant. This from mathematics means if A is a constant, leave it the fuck alone. The function takes us from A to A. Now, a sane human may ask, why do I need to define that if I'm not going to do anything? Well, remember what the rule of a function was. A function needs to cover every element of its domain. So we're just adding rule number 2 for the sake of completion to make the function S valid as a function. If we do not define 2, the function will give us a null case. It will say, hey, what is the constant A under the function S? If we do not define this, the function will say null error, null pointer error. I am forced to point at something that does not exist, and the computer will crash. Now, I use computer metaphors, but this kind of reasoning is the historical precipice of electromechanical computers. Alan Turing, Alonzo Church, those people were trained in this mathematical tradition, in this mode of thinking. This idea of defining things so clearly that there is no room for any possible misunderstanding, no matter how arbitrary it may be, is a hallmark of modern mathematical thought. So you can think of this as programming the function. We're programming the function S, and so we need to define even the trivial cases. Even the cases where we just go, oh, from A, take us to A, we need to define them. That's why 2 is there. Now, third case, if we're replacing a function letter, then the function letter is the corresponding operation in D, and the terms are t to 1, t to the n. S takes this element as if we first replace the term S under the function, and then we applied the original function. That is highly abstract. Let me provide an example. If we have something like the function A, what 3 is telling us, okay, first replace A under the function S, which is going to give us a term, and then apply the original formula, the original function, to the new term t, and that is going to give us a constant. Let's call it c. So 3 is just recursion. It's a recursion case. First apply this function and then apply the other function to the result of the previous function. Intuitively, the function S applied to the terms is the element of D, the domain, obtained by substituting for each arbitrary number j a name being a constant or referring to a constant for all occurrences of x in t being the sequence of terms, and then performing the operations of the interpretation corresponding to the function letters of t. So first we do S and then we do the function, the original function anyways. This is going to be clear, hopefully. For instance, this thing, apply the function 1 to x1 and a1, and then the result of this, apply the function 2 of x3 and the result. And the interpretation has the set of integers as its domain, so let's just say the domain is integers. f2 and f1 are interpreted as ordinary multiplication and addition respectively, and a1 is interpreted as 2. So if f2 is multiplication and f1 is addition, this is just a very weird way of saying 3 multiplied by x plus 1. So what does it mean? First we do this function, and then the result of that, we apply the multiplication. Okay, but I got the constants wrong. A1 is to be interpreted as 2. So it is, I mean, it doesn't really matter. Then for any sequence, S1, blah, 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 blah. Okay, this will also be a variable, but a different variable, so it's going to be y. We will have that S3 multiplied by S1 plus 2. S3 and S1 are just different ways of expressing a variable. It's just that S1 is the variable that is applied to the first element of the sequence, and S3 is the variable that is turned into the third element of the sequence. This is really nothing more than the ordinary way of reading mathematical expressions. Yeah, if you're a freak. But in order to become a freak, it's not that obvious or simple. Now we proceed to the definition of satisfaction, which will be an inductive definition. So we're going to build a base case, and then we're going to keep iterating, and so on. If B is an atomic well-formed formula, such that it has any number of terms and it is in an arbitrary given order, so it can be the first, second, third, and you can have 1, 2, 3, or whatever n terms. And this atomic well-formed formula under the model is the corresponding n-place relation of the interpretation, then a sequence of which we have an infinite amount, S1, S2, S3, and so on, satisfies B if and only if we replace every term of the formula A by the rules of the function S we just gave above. That is if the n tuple that matches the substitution matches the relationship in the model. Let me provide a concrete example. A of xy let's imagine that there is an arbitrary sequence, that x is the first and y is the second. So in the sequence, 1 is A and 2 is C, and we don't need more. But the sequence goes on infinitely. But we don't care because we only need 2 spaces for this one, so whatever. So first I apply the sequence function. So my atomic formula, instead of x and y, I get A and C. So I will just need to check with M, the model, if the ordered pair A and C belong, sorry, I'm using the symbol, to A under the model. In which case, A is a set of ordered pairs because A needs to be filled with two elements. Now, we already did this with our homework, with our toy examples. What we have gained with this definition is that now we can have a definition for any arbitrary size of any formula. We have gained generality. Instead of only being able to imagine models of 1, 2, or 3 elements, now we need to contend with the fact that our sequences and our models can be of an arbitrarily large size because they are infinite. A formula Then now we go to the complex cases. A formula satisfies a negation if and only if the sequence does not satisfy the formula, which is something that we intuitively did in the homework. S satisfies a conditional if and only if S does not satisfy the first element or if it satisfies the second, which is the same definition of that we have carried for the conditional since our first half of the course, since propositional logic. S satisfies for all x if and only if every sequence that differs from S in at most the nth component also satisfies B. What the fuck does that mean? Well, remember that our sequences are infinite, but our formulas are not. Our formulas can be arbitrarily long, n quantity long, but n is always a finite number. So, imagine there is a sequence S1 and S2. Both sequences are infinite, but they start with A, B, C, D, and then they diverge somewhere else. A, B, C, and D. Ba, 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 ba. Eventually, there will come an arbitrary number in the sequence, such that in sequence 1, they get, I don't know, x. I shouldn't use x. P, lowercase p. And in the I step, sequence 2 will have lowercase q. No, that is not dyslexia friendly. This will be P, and this will be K. Yeah, K is good. So the sequences do differ. They eventually differ, but at least in the 5th step, they do not differ. So basically, if I only need to replace 5, in this case, there are 4. If I only need to replace 4 terms, these two formulas, they don't differ for me. They're useless. One can do the same work as the other. So I need to specifically mention that for all x only matters if for a collection of sequences that are different in all of the relevant steps. So basically the inverse of this. I need to make sure that I am covering all possible combinations until the nth step. In this case, they're using the letter I, but it doesn't matter, just an arbitrary number. The amount of variables you need to replace, that is the number you need. So as long as you cover all possible combinations of the nth component, you're good. We do this because we cannot actually say is satisfied by every sequence, because that is not computable. We will not be able to finish validating a formula that has a universal quantifier if we define it that way. Intuitively, a sequence satisfies a well-formed formula B if and only if when, for each I, every step of the replacement, we replace all free occurrences of variables, if any, in B by a symbol representing Si. The resulting proposition is true under the given interpretation. So that is a very computerized way of saying what we're really doing is having a collection of all possible permutations of all possible arbitrary assignments expressed as sequences, and we're going to test our formulas against any arbitrary sequence that replaces the free variables with a constant. That's it. Functions will be replaced with functions, and constants will be replaced with themselves. And it sounds very underwhelming if I actually express it that way, and it kind of is, but think about it as trying to program something very primordial and basic. And so it needs to be very precise. Now we're gonna use this symbol. In propositional logic, we just said like this for semantic consequence or truth functional consequence. In first order logic, if there's no underscore, this literally means for every model. If you have a specific model in mind, like in the homework, then we need to name the model. M1, for example. But even then, this is for every sequence made with the elements of the interpretation M or the model M. B is said to be false for M if and only if no sequence in sigma satisfies B. So true is every sequence satisfies me. False is no sequence satisfies me. So that leaves the case of at least some formula which are satisfied by some sequence and not satisfied by some sequence. And that is going to be our notion of contingency. An interpretation M is said to be a model for a set gamma of well-formed formulas if and only if every well-formed formula in gamma is true for M. So, a model makes a set of formulas true. And notice that being a model is always a relation. There is no such thing as the model. And it's also funny that even universal truth at this level is always going to be true for all models. So our notion of truth becomes a lot more interesting, but also a lot less bombastic. Things are no longer universally true, I mean, kinda, sorta, but mostly we will be speaking of true for a specific model, or true for a model, or interpretation, as the case may be. And even true without any explicit last name is actually true for all models, not for every possible instance of every possible state, because models are not that versatile. Some other interesting consequences of our semantic apparatus for first order logic is that a formula is false for interpretation if and only if the negation is true. A formula is true if the negation is false. So we still have bivalence over truth and falsehood, but we do not have bivalence over satisfaction. That is, there are some formulas with free variables that may be satisfied and not satisfied. It is not the case that we can derive a formula and its negation. That is, no well-formed formula can be both true and false for a model. So we are still in a mathematical space that does not like contradictions. We will never be able to obtain a formula and its contradiction from the same model. And that's good for classical mathematics. We have the transitive property. If something is true under a model M and the conditional of B to C is true under the model, then we also have that C is true under the model. B implies C is false for a model if and only if B is true under the model and not C is true under the model, which is a generalization of our notion of truth for the conditional. Consider an interpretation M with domain M. A sequence S satisfies a conjunction if and only if satisfies both formulas, which we kind of intuitively did in homework. S, the sequence function, satisfies a disjunction if and only if S satisfies either one or the other, which also we expressed during the homework, so I hope that's not too difficult. If and only if satisfied, if and only if F satisfies both B and C, or it does not satisfy either. This is an important one. S satisfies an existential quantifier if and only if there is a sequence S prima. I know, how do you pronounce it in English? I don't think I ever heard it. S apostrophe, whatever, you say S apostrophe, that differs from S in at most the nth component, such that S apostrophe satisfies B. In other words, a sequence satisfies an existential quantifier if and only if there is an element C in the domain D, such that the sequence satisfies B. That is a very computerized way of saying we cannot claim that we know who the X is, who the existential quantifier is. So if there is at least one other sequence, possibly you, possibly not. If there is at least one other sequence that satisfies the formula under any other sequence. So basically, if there is any C, any constant under the model that satisfies B, then that satisfies the existential version of B, which again, in a less computerized form, is what we did in the homework. A formula is true under the model if and only if the universal is true under the model. Because true under the model, we understood it to be true under any sequence. And therefore, any reassignment of the variables of the formula B. Notice that in the previous definitions, we're talking about satisfaction. Here we're talking about true under the model. Closure here is a technical term that means replacing any free variable with a new formula in which that free variable is under the scope of a universal quantifier. If there are no free variables, then the closure of a formula is itself. So we don't need to do anything. So yeah, closure just means closing the free variables. Every instance of a tautology is true for any interpretation, which we also saw in the homework with the exercises 9 and 10 of the first half. So for example, either something is P or something is not P is a tautology. and therefore is true for any interpretation. An instance of a statement is a well-formed formula obtained from the statement form by substituting well-formed formulas for all statement letters, with all occurrences of the same statement letter being replaced by the same well-formed formula. That is a useful notion, but we're going to cover it in a second. So tautologies, true in every model equals tautology, other way around. Tautology means true in every model. There are some very niche and very in-depth philosophical struggles. Like most logicians agree that tautology implies true in every model, but not all logicians agree that true under every model equals tautology. I'm gonna explain one of the most common examples. So we earlier mentioned that every domain in first order logic needs at least one element. So we cannot have empty domains. So there are some formulas which are true not on virtue of being tautological, not on virtue of just their logical connectives. They are true because every domain needs to have at least one element. So for example, something exists that is P, or something exists that is not P. This is a formula that is true under every model, but many logicians and philosophers will say, no, this is not a tautology, because this formula is not empty of content. This formula is actually saying that something exists. And that is a claim that is not entirely logical. Some philosophers will say, no, that is actually a metaphysical claim. That is something that is true on virtue of the rules of models and not true on virtue of logical structure. So that is, I think, the most famous example of a formula that is true under every model of first order logic, but many philosophers will not consider it a tautology. And some logicians basically said, okay, I'm going to invent my own logic with blackjacks and hookers in which I can have an empty domain. In an alternative logic in which we can have empty domains, sorry for my awful curly braces, this formula is false. Because there exists something that is P? No, nothing exists. There exists something that is not P? No, nothing exists. Therefore, this formula will be false under this model. But then model theorists will say, well, no, because that is not a real model. That is a fake model. That is only something that pretends to be a model, but isn't actually. So the order, I mean, it's a philosophical discussion, there's debate, you can join if you want, but the accepted order is that tautology implies true under every model, but not everyone agrees that true under every model is a tautology. Now, I am particularly proud of what I just did because I have not pondered this part of my memory in at least 5 years. So I'm glad I still remember this shit. So notice what the text is saying. Every instance of a tautology is true for an interpretation. The direction is going from tautology to true. But we do not know, the text does not commit to the reverse. Something that is true under every interpretation is not necessarily a tautology. Personally speaking, I agree with this. I will not call this a tautology. because I do think this has informational content. Well, I mean, I'm just glad that I still remember this moderately complex subject matter, even without a community. But I'll be honest, I miss having access to such a community. There is a lot of that community I do not miss, but I do miss the camaraderie and the mental effort and being part of a community of experts. And that reminds me, I need to plug a project from... There is going to be some online shows in Spanish made by a fellow philosopher, VTuber friend, but in Spanish. If you're interested, they're gonna start in 3 days in August 4. You can connect and check them out. I think I will, because as I said, I miss being part of such a community of experts. So yeah, if you wanna like get a sense of what people who dedicate their lives to mathematical and formal logic do, you can check that. Block completed. Now back to our final statement. So yeah, a tautology will always be true for interpretation, and depending on your... I feel like with everything going on here and there, have doing more and more. Teachers looking for more institutional sources for learning. You will find a community again. I mean, nice, thank you. These are some things which you basically do need to exist within MeetSpace. I want to provide an alternative space, a cyber position, to use a fancy academic term, in which certain communities can exist and expand, but there are hard limits to what we can do without sharing institutional and physical space. So, I'm going to explain what an instance is in a bit. Okay, 8 is something. Okay, hello, Setter. Thanks for the hydrate. So 8 is something I sketched earlier. Do I still have it? Yeah. If I have two sequences that differ only in things they don't share. So if I a well-formed where were we? If a set of formulas or a well-formed formula B only has 4 variables, and I have two sequences and they share the same 4 variables, the same places, and then they differ in the rest, then if the sequence satisfies B, the other sequence does as well. Yeah, it's kind of trivial. And I'm not going to do the full proof. It is not necessary. I think this already has gone way beyond what a introductory course should be concerned with. Now, Okay, that's a good moment for a break. Let me change to the other book. Okay. I'll be right back. Okay, back. Sorry, I had to do a quick bathroom break. So, stretching. Everyone on the other side of the screen, I recommend you stretch as well. It may sound silly, but taking these small breaks, breathing in, oxygenating, and so on, giving your brain some time to assimilate what we just went through. It's also a useful and important part of learning, especially if you've been sitting for long times. Stand up, make sure your body starts irrigating those sleeping areas. And now that we are well stretched, take a safe position, calibrate your knees. Let's see if the knees want to cooperate. They are nice and loose and open, okay? Now that we're ready, let's go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. Now that we have completed our break, let's go introduce the other thing I wanted to talk about. Okay, so I have to be quick because we already passed the 2-hour mark, and that's not that good for YouTube videos, but okay. Let's go. So we already have like a more developed understanding of the semantics of first-order logic. We now know that things that we evaluate relative to a model or a set of models. Yeah. We're not gonna like do a tableau or tree proof. We're just gonna introduce a notion. So, in propositional logic, we have truth tables. to evaluate formulas, to see if they were true or false, to provide counterexamples, and so on. But because our domains and the amount of possible interpretations a formula in first order logic may have is infinite, we cannot do such a thing. So, this is from A Beginner's Guide to Mathematical Logic by Raymond Smullyan. That means Smullyan's in the chat, everyone. Let me read out loud. The tableau, which will be defined here, had far-reaching consequences and may well be of even greater significance than axiom systems for first-order logic. Indeed, the completeness of the axiom systems is neatly derivable from the completeness theorem for first-order tableau. First-order tableau use the 8 tableau rules of propositional logic together with the 4 rules for the quantifiers that will be given shortly. But first, some examples. Suppose we wish to prove the formula there exists a p such that there exists an x, such as x of p. If that is true, then not everyone will not be p or q. As with propositional logic, we begin the tableau with f. So remember that with tableau or 3 proofs, we can only refute. Specifically, we wish to build a possible counter model. A counter model is then a model or interpretation. Sorry, it will not be a model. It will be an interpretation that makes the original formula false. False under that interpretation. So it will be a counter model, not a model. With false, followed by the formula we wish to prove. Next, we use the rules of propositional logic to extend the tableau as follows. So, because this formula, the main logical connective, is a conditional that is false, we get the truth of the antecedent and the falsehood of the consequence. If a negation is false, then that means that the formula that follows the negation must be true. There is no rule from propositional logic that is now applicable. So now we turn to working on the quantifiers. This is the tricky part. Please pay attention. If there exists an x such that p of x, well, then that means that there exists at least one x such that p of x. We will let the parameter a, or constant a, be such an x and add the following line to the proof. If this formula is true, if there exists an x such as p of x is true, then this formula is true. Why? We do not know for sure if A is the correct sequence, the correct element in the sequence that satisfies this formula. Sorry, damn allergies. But consider the following. What do we know about A? All that we know about A so far is that A has the property P. Next, we look at the line 4, which says that whatever x we take, it is not the case that P or Q. In particular, it is not the case that PA or QA, and so we add this. So we replace the universal by taking this formula and substituting every appearance of the variable within the scope of the quantifier for a constant. This is an instantiation. I'm going to write in chat because it's a weird word. Or this is an instance of this formula. It makes sense. This formula is true for all elements. And if it is true for everyone, it has to be true for A. This is an instance of this, a particular case. If I say everyone, that means everyone. Literally everyone. Each and every single element of the domain has to satisfy the formula. In particular, A. Now, if a negation is true, then that means that the formula without the negation is false. If a disjunction is false, that means that both sides are false. In particularly, P of A is false. But we have that P of A is true and P of A is false. Line H clashes with line 5. Let's take a look at this example. We're going to try to find a counterexample to this formula. Oh, by the way, because this tree proof ended with all branches closed, that means that a counterexample is not possible. And that means that this formula can never be false, which means that this formula is true under every interpretation, or logically valid for first order logic. In the future, okay. Let us consider another example. Let us prove the formula this. If everything is P and there exists something that is P and is Q, then there exists something that is Q. Okay, let's assume it's false. If a conditional is false, then that means that the first part is true and the second one is false. If a conjunction is true, then that means that both parts are true. So that means that everything is P and there exists something that if it's P, then it's Q. Now, once again, we do an existential instantiation. We take this existential quantifier, these two variables, and replace them arbitrarily with A. Why can we do this? This is absolutely incredibly important, and I'm going to write it in red. We can instantiate an existential quantifier in a tableux if and only if the constant that replaces the variables does not show up earlier in the proof. Okay, it is that important. It is of vital importance that you memorize this. if A were to appear previously in the proof, and we do an instance of an existential quantifier, we are adding undue information to the proof. We are giving this existential quantifier one specific name. Imagine the following. Imagine we're in a Colombo episode, because Colombo fucking rules. And Colombo is now harassing a rich white motherfucker, because that is the rule of law of Columbus. They exist to harass rich white evil motherfuckers. So we have Colombo talking with a rich white motherfucker and then 3 other people. And it turns out that there are only 5 people in that room. So the rich white motherfucker, 3 other people, and Colombo. And Colombo says, well, someone in this room that is not me is the killer. It can be the rich white evil motherfucker. It can be person 1, person 2, or person 3. So we have 4 suspects. Now, when Colombo says someone dropped this glove in the murder scene, we can say there exists at least someone, and that someone dropped the glove. Instead of saying there exists at least someone and that someone dropped the glove all the time, Columbus is going to say, okay, let's imagine that that someone is the killer. We are replacing the existential quantifier with a name. But this name is not a specific name, it's just someone. Someone from this room who is the killer, but we do not know who yet, dropped the glove. The constant or the name that Colombo uses has to be fresh. A fresh variable, a fresh constant, is a constant that has not been mentioned previously in a proof. So we can do this because when we say A here, it's just a name. It's just like saying the killer. Yes, it's kinda, it is very similar, Rupert, you got it. It's kinda like a hypothesis. We're not saying that someone specific is the P and the Q, but we know that someone is. So we'll just name them temporarily A. But always remember this. The only way we can do this is if it's a fresh new variable. That is, it does not appear previously in the proof. If it appears previously in the proof, it is no longer fresh, and it will not be a good investigation if we did that. Okay, so we know that everything is P. And we know that there is at least something that if it's P, then it's Q. Okay, we create an instance of 5. A is the A that if it's P, then it's Q. Well, everything is P, particularly A. So A is P. But 3 says it is false that something is Q. That is another way of saying nothing is Q. So A of Q needs to be false by 3 because the existential quantifier is false. And then we finally split 6 into 2 branches. Either A is not P, which contradicts with 7, or A is Q, which contradicts with 8. Either way, both branches close, so we end our tree proof and the original formula is true under any interpretation. Okay? And this is the last thing we're gonna look for today. So the rules for quantifiers, for tree proofs that we had from proposition logic, they still apply. I'm gonna upload them to the Discord for reference. And we're gonna add 4 more rules. If the universal quantifier is true or it just appears with a negation, then we can create an instance of the formula where we replace the variables uniformly with constant, such that where a is any constant that we want. If we see an existential quantifier, we can infer or we can create an instance of the formula without the quantifier for any constant a, provided that a does not yet occur on the tableau, which is what I just said. A needs to be a fresh new constant. Here is the reason for the proviso in italics just above. Suppose that in the course of a proof we show some x that has a property p. We can just say, well, let A be such an x. Now suppose that there is an x having some other property q. We cannot legitimately say, let A be such an x, because we have already committed the symbol A to being the property of some x having the property p, and we do not know if there is any x, any variable, any object in our domain having both the property p and the property q! Exclamation mark! Let me provide another way of seeing it. If someone has the property of being bald and someone has the property of being a redhead, I can instantiate this. Okay, A is gonna be the bald person. I'm gonna call A Mr. Baldy. Sorry, alarm. I know that someone in my interpretation is bald, and I know that someone in my interpretation is red-headed. So I'm gonna call the bald person Mr. Baldy, and I'm gonna call the red-headed person Mr. Red. Do I have any information that allow me to claim that Mr. Baldy is Mr. Red? No! The bald person is bald. The red-headed person has red hair. We need to be able to take away or analyze the existential quantifier and to reduce the case to a propositional problem. That is basically what we do. But in order to do that, we need to make instances of the existential quantifier. The universal quantifier does not have such limits. If everything is bald, that means everyone is bald. And I can replace the variable with any constant from my domain. But if at least someone is bald, then all I know is that there is some object in my domain which I will call Mr. Baldy, and that's it. And I do not know anything about Mr. Baldy other than the fact that they are bald, or that they have the property, if you want to be more abstract. If a universal is false, then that means a false universal can be converted into an existential that negates. So if I have a universal that is false, such that let me move it somewhere else. That way. So if I have a universal that is false, and I have a p of x, then that means that I will create, using the same rules as an extension quantifier, a p of a not, someone that does not have the property p. Again, a, or whatever constant you choose, must be new to the tableau for the same reason as the extension quantifier, because universal negated is actually an extension negating. If we say an extension is false or an extension is negated, then we may infer the formula negated for any parameter. No restriction necessary, because likewise, if there doesn't exist an x such that the property is fulfilled for any x, that is actually, or we can see it in a different light, as a universal negating. Okay, that is long enough. We're almost in 2 hours and a half. We actually have enough people for a raid. Let me see who we can raid today. I'll send you all to Yarek. Oh no, wait. Missed, okay. I'll send you all with Mist, who is drawing. Thank you all for joining. All the supplementary materials will be uploaded to the Discord. If you wanna join and do the homeworks, please join us there. I'll see you all during the week to play, and next Saturday to keep studying. Actually, we can no longer do the raid. People left. Oh well. I guess that's it then. Bye-bye, everyone. Have a good one. Later. Whoops.